Salome, princess of Judea, daughter of Herodias, and someone who you should immediately run away from if she so much as utters the name Jokanaan. By looking at her class, design, skill set, backstory, and characterization, how well does Salome compare to her biblical and fictional counterpart? And what grade would I give her depiction? Let's find out, shall we? So, quick warning. Because of who I am talking about and what she is most famous for, there's gonna be some artistic depictions of severed heads in this video. A lot of them. I'm avoiding the more gruesome examples I found, but I thought I'd give this warning just in case. Anyway, let's continue. Salome is a berserker class servant, which is probably the only real choice for her. She never kills anyone in her legends, doesn't wield a weapon or ride a horse or anything like that. She just does a vaguely erotic dance, asks for someone's head to get chopped off, and then, depending upon the version, gets creepily excited upon seeing said person's head. Okay, that's a simplification, but my point is, we're not dealing with a warrior of legend here. Insanity, however, that very much is in play. Now, I do have a problem with equating insanity with violence, but that's pretty much all we have for Salome, her creepy desire to have John the Baptist, Jokanaan, killed. Because of that, I don't see what else Salome could be aside from a berserker. Also, quick note about names here. John the Baptist and Jokanaan are the same person. The 1891 play Salome gave him the name Jokanaan, which is an alternate version of the name Jokanaan, or Yohanan, or just Jonathan. I'll be using John the Baptist, and Jokanaan interchangeably throughout this video. Getting into her character design, Salome doesn't wear very much. But unlike many other servants I've covered, this lack of clothing actually is connected to the character. To put it simply, there are two versions of Salome. The one from the New Testament who was increasingly depicted as a temptress over the centuries, and then the fictional one from the works of people like Oscar Wilde and Richard Strauss, who took the idea of a seductive dancer and made it into the sultry, batshit insane character that we have now. The FGO illustrator even highlights this, that if he was to draw her to be accurate to these modern depictions, Salome would be nude and covered in copious amounts of blood while holding a freshly severed head. Which, well, you can understand why they decided not to go with that. So instead, we get a Salome who looks like an exotic dancer and is weirdly interested in skulls. I mean, she's even riding atop a skull. I'll be saying more about this dance stuff later, but for now, Salome's design works well enough. But it also makes clear that the Salome we are getting is more closely tied to modern interpretations of the character rather than the original. Moving into her skill set, Salome's first skill is blood-soaked silver platter, referring to how John the Baptist's head was delivered to Salome. It was on a silver platter. We even see this platter in Salome's various ascension forms. Naturally, the platter was also blood-soaked because, well, it's a severed head. As far as the skill goes, it gives Salome buffs against lawful and good-aligned enemies. Since Jokanaan was considered to be a holy man, he's a Catholic saint and he's the one who baptized Jesus, hence the name, it makes sense that Salome would have an edge against those two alignments. Salome's second skill is Natural Body Figure, a generic-sounding skill that is actually exclusive to Salome. It refers to Salome having incredible beauty from birth. This makes it similar to the skill Golden Rule Body you see on servants like Da Vinci or Maeve, but Natural Body also includes a strength boost. Also, apparently an ability to shapeshift. I don't quite understand that. Is that something Salome actually does? This part is just confusing me. The gist of this skill still works though, since Salome was said to be incredibly beautiful, dangerously so as it turned out. And relating to that, Salome's third skill is Dance of the Seven Veils, the infamous dance Salome puts on for her stepfather, Herod Antipas. Originally this dance wasn't named in the New Testament, only getting this name in Oscar Wilde's 1891 play Salome. At Herod's birthday party, Salome puts on a dance for him and the others gathered there. And the king is so entranced by this that he offers to give Salome anything she asks for, including up to half of his kingdom. Holy hell, just what kind of dance did she do? Clearly we aren't the only ones wondering that, because this dance became the subject of speculation, artistic depiction, and prose for centuries until we ended up with the modern depiction, which portrays this dance as being vaguely erotic, or perhaps even a striptease, which, if that's the case, would make Salome the second stripper in Chaldea. Exactly what this dance is like is open to interpretation, and it has seen many different ones over the centuries. Anyway, this dance is by far the most famous thing about Salome, to the point that it actually surprises me that this isn't her MP. As for what is, well,
愛しくて愛しくてさああなたの首をちょうだいファム・ファタル・ブーゼン
Salome's noble phantasm is femme fatale baiser, or deadly woman's kiss in French, whereupon she puts the enemy on the silver platter, then summons a giant skull to bite them. Following that dance, Jokanaan is then beheaded as per Salome's request, and the head is brought to her on a silver platter. In the play Salome, she then takes the severed head and kisses it upon the lips, which, as you might expect, freaks everyone out. Though in some other stories, she does much more than that, which might be what her final ascension art is referencing. Whatever happened, Herod immediately orders her execution. The Biblical Salome was not executed, but I'll talk more about her in the backstory section. As for the MP's name, you may be wondering why it's in French. Well, Oscar Wilde, like his contemporary Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, was originally from Ireland, but wrote primarily in English. Britain, however, had a law against portraying things from the Bible on stage, and so Wilde decided to try his luck in France instead, writing his play Salome in French instead of English. I think that's why our MP's name is in French rather than English. While perhaps not as famous as the dance itself, Salome kissing John's severed head is also pretty infamous ever since it first appeared in that play, and so I guess it can work as an MP. It really is either the dance or this. There aren't any other real options here. Salome's craft essence is Yokanaan's head, featuring a pile of skulls, most of them blue, but with one normal colored one too, presumably that of Jokanaan himself. The CE's text, however, talks about something else, Salome's history of killing her own masters. The gist is that whenever Salome is summoned, her madness enhancement leads her to start seeing her own master as being Jokanaan. As she becomes more convinced that her master is, in fact, Jokanaan, she starts to desire their head, eventually leading her to take it for herself. But since killing your own master kinda gets you unsummoned, all that's left is this growing pile of skulls Salome is collecting. This is a central part of Salome's FGO characterization, something that we will talk about again later. Salome's Valentines CE is For You from Salome, featuring some varied chocolate shaped like, gee, I wonder what. I think you get the point by now. Salome is into skulls and severed heads. Now for characterization, starting with a look into the legend surrounding Salome. Living from 14 CE to 62 CE, Salome was the daughter of Herodias, princess of Judea, making her a princess as well. Her father was Herod II, prince of Judea. And, give me a moment to untangle this. So Herod the Great's first wife was Mariamne I, who has a son named Aristobulus, the father of Herodias. Herod the Great's third wife, though, was Mariamne II, and her son was Herod II. In other words, Salome's parents were related, since Herod II was the half-uncle of Herodias. Hooray, incest! Anyway, Herod II had become the heir of his father, Herod the Great, but he got disinherited shortly before his father's death, leaving him with nothing. Not that that really mattered, though, because his siblings, who all got pieces of their father's kingdom instead, ended up having their parts of the kingdom gradually get inherited by the Roman Empire. If you remember back to my video on Boudica, I mentioned how the Roman Empire's methods of conquest weren't always marching in with a giant army and taking over. It was often a gradual process, where they would offer protection to local rulers in exchange for letting them govern themselves, but that Rome would inherit their lands upon the ruler's death. This is what had been going on in Judea for some time, having been a Roman client state ever since Pompey Magnus had intervened in a civil war during the year 63 BCE. A king from Herod's dynasty would continue to rule in Judea until around 92 CE, but it had already become the Roman province of Judea in 6 CE, before Salome was born. Herod II and Herodias lived in exile in Rome, which means Salome might have actually been born in Rome, not Judea. But at some point before the year 30 CE, Herodias decided to divorce her husband in favor of Herod Antipas, also known as Herod the Tetrarch or King Herod, and another one of Herod the Great's sons, meaning Herodias decided to divorce her half-uncle Herod II to marry a different half-uncle, Herod Antipas. Hooray, more incest! However, this marriage attracted some criticism, particularly from John the Baptist, who openly criticized the king for marrying the ex-wife of his half-brother. Yeah, this is so messed up. Anyway, Herod didn't take too kindly to that criticism, and so decided to throw John in jail. But Herodias was even more upset. She actually wanted John to be executed for it, but Herod was hesitant because of John's reputation as a holy man. Into this story comes Salome, or rather the daughter of Herodias, because she isn't even named in the New Testament. It is a historian named Flavius Josephus that names her as Salome III. At a party for Herod's birthday, she puts on a dance for those present, which completely entrances Herod, who, again, is Salome's stepfather. He offers her anything she might ask for, up to half of his kingdom. Salome, though, isn't sure what to ask for, so she turns to her mother Herodias to ask her what she should ask for. Herodias tells Salome to ask for the head of John the Baptist. Salome does so, and, soon enough, in comes John's severed head, which Salome then passes off to her mother. What happened after that is not recorded, though that historian Josephus says that Salome later also married an uncle, Philip the Tetrarch, and then her cousin Aristobulus V, becoming Queen of Armenia until her death in 62 CE. Okay, seriously, what is with all the incest? Is the Herodian dynasty like the Jewish Lannisters or Targaryens or something? This is crazy. Anyway, that's the story of the original Salome. But over the next 2 millennia, as Christianity became popular, it became common to depict scenes from the Bible in artworks. As time passed, depictions of Salome changed, turning her into a temptress who lured Herod into having John the Baptist killed, because of course it did. Yet another wicked, sinful woman to blame for everything. This first appeared in literature in a short story, Herodias, written in 1877 by Gustave Flaubert, who made Salome into the one that wanted John's head rather than her mother. But it was in Oscar Wilde's 1891 play Salome that the modern interpretation of the character took form. Here she is a seductress who enchants everyone around her, and yet, when she meets the imprisoned Jokanaan, he rejects her, calls her a child of an adulteress, and says their lips will never meet. From here things proceed similarly to how they did in the Bible. The party, the dance, then the request for John's head. The major difference is that it is Salome herself who desires Jokanaan's head. When she finally gets it, she fulfills her wish to kiss the lips of the severed head, leading to Herod freaking out and having her executed. This play didn't gain much traction at first, but got much more after being adapted into an opera by Richard Strauss in 1905. It was in later productions of this opera that Salome's dance was turned into a striptease. And since this was 1905, it wouldn't be long before Salome's story would find itself adapted to the new medium of film. While originally she was an unnamed girl who entertained a king and fulfilled her mother's wish for the head of John the Baptist, Salome has become much more than that. Not an anonymous bit player, but the instigator who sought the death of one of Christianity's most notable figures, because he was the only man who refused her. But of course, he can't refuse her if he's dead, now can he? Shifting over to Fate Grand Order, Salome first was introduced to the game during the 4th anniversary, but it took her a long time to get any major plot appearances. She gets a brief appearance during the Amazones.com event, where Salome asks for a delivery of, I think you can guess. But since delivering severed heads in packages isn't legal, she gets a shower head instead. Salome tries to take the heads of those delivering this package, attacks, and is defeated. That's it. She has an even smaller appearance during the Fate Requiem collab event, where she is another minor enemy to be defeated later on. Her first real appearance is her own interlude, where she is fitting into Chaldea, but the protagonist and others are uneasy around Salome. This leads to a conversation where Salome talks about what I brought up with her craft essence, how Salome ends up seeing her masters as being Jokanaan, and so wanting to claim their heads. She says that she is trying her best to hold these urges back, but it is a warning of things to come. Finally, nearly 3 years after she was introduced to the game, Salome gets a major story appearance in Lost Belt 6.5, Traum. Salome is part of the Revenge Realm under Kriemhild, meeting the protagonist after they are captured by Zhang Jue. She quickly takes a liking to the protagonist, saving them from torture, asking about their past adventures, and bringing them food. She tries to cook the food herself, but she's an amateur at it since, well, she was a princess. She probably never had to cook in her life. Despite her warming up to an enemy, Kriemhild isn't too concerned about it. After all, she knows what can happen if Salome gets too close to someone. Before long, Salome begins to wonder if the protagonist is, in fact, her Jokanaan, something that, if she thinks is the case, is almost certain to be fatal. After a few days, a rescue party from the Righteous Realm breaks the protagonist out of the prison, and Salome decides to help out, not wanting to let them go. As the rescue party gets picked off by the Revenge Realm one by one, it is ultimately left up to Salome to help the protagonist escape. But does she actually want them to escape? The closer you get to safety, the closer Salome gets to thinking that they really are Jokanaan. This reaches its climax in a forest close to the border, where Salome very nearly claims that head for herself. It is only when the protagonist starts begging for their life that Salome realizes that this can't be Jokanaan, since he wouldn't have done that. She allows the protagonist to escape, only to be struck down by an unknown sniper, who we now know to be Sugitani Zenjubo, the ninja who tried and failed to assassinate Oda Nobunaga in 1573. Salome may have been the first notable character death in Traum, but she pretty much owned the first third of that story. Pretty much from the moment that the protagonist was locked away in the Revenge Realm's jail, she was the central character, and remained so until her death. It may have been short, but Salome left a pretty strong impression, giving her a moment in the spotlight that she badly needed. Since you now know what her backstory is, you know that there isn't a whole lot to work with. Her character isn't even named in the Bible, and the Salome created since then has become something very different, one who desired Jokanaan for herself rather than just being an agent of her mother. It is this modern depiction of Salome that we get in FGO, and it makes sense since that is the version of Salome that is best known today. Chances are she might not get many character moments in the future, but I do think that, perhaps, she could use one more interlude, one that dives into the conflict between the original Salome and the modern one, the one that the Berserker servant represents. It could be an interesting dive into how servants are affected by their fame and reputation, twisting them into something different from what they ought to be. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Salome's depiction in Fate Grand Order? Well, her character design and skill set are solid, taking the few details we have about Salome and making the most of them. Whether it be with her sultry design, the names of her skills, or even her MP, all of it can be traced back to Salome as she exists in her modern incarnations. With that said, I do have one nitpick. One skill Salome doesn't have but absolutely deserves is Innocent Monster, because I think she is an excellent representation of what that skill is meant to be about. Characters who are made out to be evil far beyond what they were originally. While I do appreciate that all of her skills reference her legend in some way, that does feel like a missed opportunity. As for characterization, it's also very good, even if we don't get to spend much time with Salome. She was the last of the Bronze Servants released during the 4th anniversary to get a role in the main story, but it was a memorable one. With that said, I don't think there is much more FGO can do with her character. Her story is just too short. But who knows? Perhaps the writers will come up with something interesting. I wouldn't put it past them. But until then, Salome is the servant equivalent of a one-hit wonder. A very well-depicted servant, but only because there was so little to work with in the first place. And so for a final grade, I'm going to give Salome, Princess of Judea, an A-. If you would like to learn more about another character who has a lewd reputation but actually deserves it, check out my video on Queen Maeve here. Until next time.